The man from the state road office saw the steeple before he saw the town. It stood white and sharp above the birches on the east shore of Sarvey Lake, a quarter-mile up from the water, on ground that still showed the raw yellow of new fill. He slowed his Plymouth and leaned over the wheel. He had driven this road in 1941, mapping culverts for the county, and he would have sworn on his mother's Bible that the east shore of Sarvey Lake held nothing but birches and a hay meadow. In the cafe in Harjula, he spread his old map on the counter and put his finger on the west shore, on the little cross that marked St. Henrik's Lutheran, and asked the woman pouring his coffee when the congregation had found the money to build new. Lumber being what it was in the summer of 1947, a church that size ran better than $20,000, and Harjula did not look like a town with $20,000. The woman looked at his finger for a moment. Then she turned his hand over, gently, the way you would turn a card, and moved it across the blue of the lake to the east shore. "Nobody built anything," she said. "That's the same church. It walked." The man laughed. The woman did not. 2.1 miles, she said, across the ice, in February. 58 tons. They figured it after, and the county engineers stood on the shore with a stopwatch the whole way, waiting to be right. The man looked out the window at the steeple, then back at the map, then out the window again. He noticed something then that he had missed at first. The tower, tall and white and proud, had no bell in it. The louvers stood open on plain daylight. "If it can walk a church across a lake," he said, "seems like this town could afford a bell." The woman took her coffee pot back off the counter. "We have a bell," she said. "It's been at the bottom of that lake since 1928. And if you want the whole of it, you'll want to ask Arvo Niskanen. He's the one who asked the lake to give it back. Before the ice goes any further, a word to you, listening. Stories like this one are stitched together slow, the way the old crews did their work. And if the slow way is your way, the subscribe button below is how you keep a seat by this stove. Leave a comment too, and tell me where you're listening from tonight. Some of you write in from towns just like Harjula, and I read everyone. Now, the lake, the church, and the man they called the funeral team. To understand the winter of 1947, you have to go back to a morning in March of 1928, when Arvo Niskanen was 19 years old and holding the lines of a 4-horse hitch on the ice of Sarvey Lake, watching his uncle Ani walk backward in front of a sledge that carried a brand new church bell. The Niskanens had moved buildings in Cortes County since the logging days. Arvo's grandfather had skidded cook shacks and bunkhouses from one cutting to the next behind oxen, and Ani had turned the trade into a business with a painted sign. Granaries, barns, the odd farmhouse, jacked and cribbed and walked down township roads on timber shoes behind black Belgian horses. Ani was the best mover in 3 counties and knew it quietly. When St. Henrik's ordered a bell at last, cast in 1927, 1,140 pounds of bronze, it was Ani they hired to bring it the last leg, across the lake. Because the ice road was 8 miles shorter than the swamp road, and the congregation wanted the bell hung by Easter. It was the 9th of March, too late in the season, and Ani knew it, and hurried anyway, because Easter does not move for ice. A half-mile out from the west shore, the sledge crossed a place where the snow lay a shade grayer than the snow around it, and the lake opened underneath the bell like a trap door, and 1,140 pounds of bronze went down 64 feet into the dark, with a sound Arvo said afterward was almost gentle. The horses scrambled clear. Ani went into his chest and was hauled out by his own son's age mates, and stood on the ice, soaked and steaming, looking at the black water while the whole west shore watched. No one drowned. That was the mercy of it, and also the cruelty, because a drowning would have been a tragedy, and what happened instead was a joke. For 19 years, whenever a thing in Cortes County went missing, a hammer, a heifer, a husband, somebody would say it. Ask the lake. The lake keeps things. Ani Niskanen never took another job on ice. But every winter after, from first freeze to breakup, he went out on Sarvey Lake alone with a hand auger and a canvas-bound book. And he drilled holes, and he measured, and he wrote. The town watched him do it for 15 winters and settled on an opinion. There went a man measuring a lake that had already beaten him. He died in January of 1943, with the book in a toolbox at the foot of his bed. And the toolbox came to Arvo, because Arvo was the one who had stayed with the horses. By then, the business was mostly a memory with harness on it. Trucks had come into the county, after the war the way water comes into a boot. Gordy Lundin ran 4 of them out of a gravel yard south of Harjula, and Lundin Cartage took the moving work now, took it fast and took it cheap. And what was left for a man with 8 black Belgians was stump pulling, and the kind of small barn jobs that trucks could not be bothered to bid. Arvo's horses walked slow and matched, black as stove iron, heads down. And some wit outside the feed store watched them come up the road one afternoon and said it looked like a funeral going by. It stuck the way those things stick. The funeral team. Arvo heard it and said nothing, which the town took for proof that it fit. He was 38 years old the autumn the church came up. He had a wife, Sima, who kept the books and the garden, and a daughter, Lily, who was 9 and could back a wagon better than most hired men. And he had his uncle's toolbox, and inside it the canvas book that he had read so many times the pages had gone soft as cloth. Here is what was in that book, because the book is the story. 15 winters of Sarvi Lake, drilled and written down, ice thickness at more than 200 stations, marked on a hand-drawn map dated every winter. So that laid side by side the winters showed their habits like the rings of a tree, where the lake froze first and where it froze last. And marked in red, gone over so many times the paper had worn thin, 3 places Ani called the eyes. Spots where springs fed up from the bottom, and the moving water thinned the ice from underneath, so that a sheet 2 feet thick 100 yards away might be a hand's width thick over an eye, and the snow on top would tell you almost nothing. The gray patch in March of 1928 had been the middle eye. Ani had not known it then. He spent 15 winters making sure that somebody, someday, would. And there was the rule, printed in pencil at the top of the very first page, underlined twice: blue ice carries, white ice lies. Clear ice, black blue, frozen quiet out of still water, is one thing. White ice, frozen out of slush and snow, full of air, is another, and a foot of it is not worth half a foot of blue. And the two lie layered in a lake like good and bad lumber in the same stack, so that the auger, not the eye, is the only honest judge. On the last page, in a different, older hand, dated the winter before he died, Ani had written one more line, and Arvo had never shown it to anyone. The lake didn't take the bell, I gave it. I was in a hurry. The autumn of 1946, St. Henrik's Lutheran ran out of road. The church had been built in 1896 on the west shore to serve Pojala, the sawmill town, back when Pojala had 300 souls and a company store. The mill cut out in 1939, and the town emptied like a pail with a hole in it, family by family, most of them settling across the water in Harjula, where the creamery and the railroad were. By 1946, the congregation drove around the lake to worship in the town they had left. 22 miles of swamp road, 7 timber bridges, not one of them rated past 15 tons, a road the county plowed last and graded never. Old people stopped coming in winter. The board met in October and put 2 numbers side by side. A new church in Harjula, at what lumber cost since the war? $28,400, if you could even get the material, which the yard in Duluth would not promise, or move the one they had. They wrote letters. A Duluth outfit with lowboy trucks and a fine brochure sent a man who stood on the west shore for half an hour and drove home. And the letter that followed said the swamp road bridges would have to be rebuilt at the church's expense, all 7, and quoted $9,700 for the move besides. A second firm proposed a summer barge and withdrew the proposal a week later when somebody in their office looked up the draft of Sarvi Lake's South Channel. And Gordy Lundin asked at his own gate whether he would take his trucks across the ice, where the route was 2 miles instead of 22, said the only sensible thing a truckman could say. No truck of mine parks on that lake. That lake's got a bell in it, and I know how it got there. Which was when Arvo Niskanen wrote out a bid in Sima's good handwriting, $2,150, horses, jacks, and timber included, the congregation to feed the crew, and drove it to the board meeting himself. and stood holding his cap while the room went quiet enough to hear the stove tick. The vote was 5-2. It was not a vote of confidence. It was arithmetic, and everybody in the room knew it. And Mrs. Eiley Vertinen, who chaired the board, said as much when she signed. We can't afford to build, and we can't afford Duluth. So we'll pray for cold. Pastor Urho Salmela, who was young and had been at St. Henrik's only 3 years, asked whether it was wise, given the history. Nobody answered him directly. In Cortes County, the history was not something you discussed. It was something you said in 3 words outside the feed store. Ask the lake. There was one more door to get through, and it had a desk behind it. Merle Dahlberg had been county engineer for 11 years, a careful man with a slide rule and a filing cabinet. And the lake route crossed a county ice road easement, which gave him the authority to forbid the move, and he intended to use it. He said so plainly when Arvo came to his office in November. He had a folder open on the desk before Arvo sat down. 1928, Dahlberg said. I looked it up. Your own family put 1,100 pounds of bronze through that ice. Now you want to walk it with 116,000. Show me numbers, Niskanen. Numbers older than your nerve. So Arvo put the canvas book on the desk. Dahlberg read it for a long time. He read it the way an engineer reads, front to back, sideways, holding the map to the window light. During the war, he had seen the Army's cold region tables, the ones the engineers used for tank crossings in the north. Thickness against load, blue ice against white. And what he was holding was the same science, gathered with a hand auger by a man everybody in the county had agreed was a fool. He did not say that. What he said was that 15 winters of somebody else's lake proved nothing about this winter, and Arvo said that was correct, and that he intended to drill this winter too, every 150 feet along a staked line twice a week, and file every measurement at this desk, and Dahlberg could set the number the ice had to make. Dahlberg set it high on purpose. 28 inches of blue ice, blue only, white ice not counted, over every foot of the route, held for 10 days before the move, with a written log. He expected the requirement to kill the job quietly and save everyone the embarrassment. And if the lake makes your number, Arvo asked. Then I'll stand on the shore, Dahlberg said, and watch. The cold came early and came honest. By the middle of December, the lake had locked up black and clear under a thin, dry snow, and Arvo went to work. And the town came out to watch him do it, because there was nothing better on in Cortes County that winter than the funeral team getting ready to bury a church. The work ran in 2 places at once. On the west shore, the church itself, 42 screwjacks set under the sills in cribs of stacked oak turned in rounds, a quarter turned to a jack, around and around for days, so that 58 tons rose off its stone foundation slower than the eye could catch, level as a pond. Under it, they slid 2 shoes of bog tamarack, 66 feet long, hewed on the bottom, like sled runners, chained and bolted through the floor beams. Tamarack because it is heavy, cheap, and slick when frozen, and because Ani's book said so in a margin. A building being moved does not need to be strong. It needs to be held so that it never learns it is moving. That is the whole craft. Cribbing tight, jacks even. No corner ever asked to carry what the others have set down. Out on the lake, the road, Arvo and Taisto Hakala, who had cut lake ice for the ice houses of 3 towns for 50 years and was the only man in Harjula who had ever treated Ani's winters on the lake as work rather than penance, staked the route with cut spruce trees frozen upright in auger holes, a line of small green flags running 2 miles at a gentle dogleg, because the straight line crossed the middle eye and the dogleg did not. Then, on the cold nights, they built the road thicker. This was ice harvesters' knowledge and Army knowledge both. Pump lake water up through the auger holes and flood the staked lane an inch at a time. Let each flood freeze hard before the next. And the road grows downward strong, layer on layer, like painting in reverse. The fire hall lent the pump. Lily rode the water wagon and kept the count of floods in a school tablet. 17 floods before Christmas. The first failure came from the sky. 3 days of south wind in early January, 36 degrees and drizzle. And the top 4 inches of the flooded lane went to gray slush and froze back full of air. White ice. A stranger would have measured the lane and called it thicker. Arvo augured it, read the plug like a doctor reading a chart, and spent 9 days scraping the lane down to blue and flooding it again, while the feed store observed that the funeral team was now shoveling a lake. The second failure came from the church. On the 18th of January, with the building riding high on its cribs, a jack under the northeast corner punched through a sill, rotted from 90 years of snow against the skirting, and the corner dropped 4 inches with a crack that emptied every window on the street of faces and put them in the churchyard. 4 inches is nothing and everything. Plaster split along the nave's ceiling in a line like winter lightning. Pastor Salmela stood in the doorway looking up at it and said nothing at all, which was worse than anything he could have said. It cost 6 days to sister the sill and re-crib, and it cost more than that in the only currency that mattered, because the story that went around the county store counters was not that a sill had failed. It was that the funeral team had dropped the casket. Through all of it, twice a week, Arvo drilled the line and filed the log at Dahlberg's desk, and the numbers climbed the way water freezes without hurry and without apology. 22 inches at the month's turn. 25, 28 and holding, station after station, all down the flagged dogleg, blue to the bottom of the plug. On the 1st of February, Dahlberg walked the route himself with his own auger, which Arvo had known he would do and had wanted him to do, and drilled 11 holes of his own choosing, and stood a long while over the last one, out in the middle of that white silence, a mile from either shore. Then he came in off the ice and signed the permit at his desk without sitting down, and set his stopwatch on the blotter where Arvo could see it. Monday then, he said, I'll be on the shore. Monday came the 3rd of February, 1947, 18 below zero at dawn, the sky green at the edges the way deep cold makes it. They had walked the church down from its foundation to the shore ice over 3 days the week before, 100 feet at a time, and now it stood at the lake's white edge with its tower up against the stars going out, the tallest thing for 10 miles, waiting. 8 black Belgians stood hitched in 2 spans to the pull chains, breath rising off them like smoke off chimneys. Half the county stood on the west shore behind a rope Taisto had strung, and it was quiet. And in the quiet somebody's voice carried, not meaning to be cruel, only telling the truth as the county knew it. Ask the lake, it keeps things. Arvo checked the last chain shackle with his bare thumb, put his mitten back on, and spoke to the horses the way he always did, half finish, half nothing, a sound more than a word. Sampo and Vapu leaned into their collars first, and the other 6 took it up, 8 tons of horse setting themselves against 58 tons of church. The chains coming up off the ice 1 link at a time, ringing tight. The church did not move. The horses dug, squealing steel on their shoes, and the chains sang like fence wire, and the tamarack shoes, which had stood loaded on the shore ice through 4 bitter nights, held to the lake as if the lake had grown up around them. Not stuck, frozen down, welded. On the shore the rope line had gone perfectly silent, and in that silence Gordy Lundin, standing on his truck's running board for the view, said, not quietly, the thing the whole county was thinking. Well, there it is. The lakes took bigger things off that family than a church. Arvo eased the horses. He stood in the 18 below dawn, with one hand flat on the frozen shoe, feeling for something through his mitten, and looked down the 2 miles of flagged blue road his uncle's book had drawn, and did not answer. What Arvo was feeling for through his mitten was in the book, page 40, in the margin, beside a drawing of a loaded shoe. A runner that stands loaded on ice through a cold night freezes down by morning every time, and the bond is stronger than any straight-ahead pull. Break it sideways, never ahead. He walked the length of both shoes, unhooked the pull chains, and re-hitched all 8 horses to the north shoe alone, at a right angle to the line of travel, a short hitch, almost rude. The crowd on the shore murmured at it, because it looked like a man giving up and dragging his timber home. Then Arvo clucked once, the teams snapped into their collars together, and the frozen bond let go along 66 feet of tamarack with a crack like a rifle fired down a well. The south shoe took 4 minutes more. When he hitched ahead again and asked, the church came off the shore of Sarvi Lake, as quietly as a boat leaving a dock. and the sound that went up from behind the rope was not a cheer exactly. It was closer to the sound people make at a birth. Dahlberg clicked his stopwatch. It read 7 minutes past 8 in the morning. Arvo let the church move exactly as fast as he walked, and he walked slow, and this was not temperament. It was the deepest thing in the book. A load on ice does not sit on a shelf. It floats on a plate, and the plate bends. Under 58 tons, the whole sheet dips into a shallow bowl, inches deep and wider than a hayfield. And the bowl travels with the load like the wake travels with a boat. Move gently, and the water beneath has time to get out of the way. And the bowl stays shallow and kind. Hurry, and the bowl steepens into a traveling wave. And where that wave meets a shore, a shoal, or another wave, the sheet can break upward, ahead of you, where you have not yet been, and where your auger holes tell you nothing. The Army's cold region manuals had a number for the dangerous speed. Ani's book had a sentence: never faster than a man walks behind a casket. So the funeral team walked, and the county watched a white church stand out onto 2 miles of frozen lake at the pace of grief. And for the first hour, nobody on shore said anything at all. They made a little over 4,000 feet the first day, stopping on the hour for Arvo and Taisto to drill ahead and read the plugs. Blue to the bottom, 29, 31, 30 inches. The numbers going into the tablet, in Lily's cold, careful hand from the shore telescope. Her teacher had lent the school for the occasion. At dusk, Arvo cribbed the shoes up on oak blocks so they stood clear of the ice, out of reach of the night's welding, and banked the horses in a canvas windbreak. And Sima walked out across the ice with supper and a kerosene lantern, and set the lantern on a pew inside the empty nave. That was the night the county stopped joking. A church glowing faint amber a mile out on black ice under a green sky is not a thing you laugh at. Cars came from 3 townships and parked along the west shore with their engines off, and people stood in the terrible cold and just looked. And the lake boomed and rang under the stars the way deep ice does on deep cold nights, long grinding notes that run for a mile. And Taisto stood at the rope, telling anyone nervous enough to ask that booming ice is happy ice. It is the sound of the sheet growing, cold, squeezing it tighter, the same as a house cracking its knuckles on a January night. It is the quiet lake, he said, that you want to be afraid of. The quiet came on the second afternoon. The wind swung south at noon and carried the smell of thaw, and by 2 o'clock it was 34 degrees, water standing gray and sheeted on the ice, the horse's footing gone greasy. And at the elbow of the dogleg, where the flagged lane bent to give the middle eye its 300 feet of respect, Arvo's drill brought up a plug with the last 4 inches dark and wet. And 50 feet farther on the lane, a lead had opened in the night, a wet black crack a hand wide, running crosswise as far as the flags went. The warm wind had found the one place on Sarvi Lake where the springs fed up warm from underneath, and the eye was reaching for the lane. Dahlberg came out from the shore on foot, which he was not obliged to do, and stood over the crack with Arvo in the sleet, and said the only engineering there was to say. Wait, and the thaw eats blue ice by the inch, while the shoes freeze down every night and the load sits on a softening plate. Go on across the crack, and no table in any Army manual would sign for it. Go back, and the county got the ending it had gathered to see. Arvo took off his mitten, laid his hand flat on the wet ice, the way he had at the shore, and then went to the church and brought out the canvas book, and opened it on the sledge in the sleet to the map of the middle eye. 15 winters, and Ani had not just marked the eye. He had drawn its shape, winter by winter, a long oval lying northeast to southwest with the current that fed it, and the shape held steady every year like a birthmark. The lane's respectful 300 feet stood off the eye's side. But off its narrow southern end, the book showed blue ice standing thick winter after winter, right up close, because the current bent east there, and the still water froze honest. Your uncle drew that, Dahlberg said. It was not quite a question. 15 times, Arvo said. They drilled the new line that evening by lantern light, Arvo and Taisto, and when the third lantern came out of the dark, Gordy Lundin, who had driven around the south end of the lake without telling anyone why, and walked out onto ice he had sworn no man would catch him on, carrying his own auger. Nobody remarked on it. 37 holes between dusk and midnight, on a line that swung south of the flagged lane and passed 110 yards off the eye's southern point. And every plug came up blue, 30 inches and better, exactly where a dead man's pencil said it would. They took the detour in the dark because the cold came back behind the wind, and Arvo wanted the night's hardness under the load. And this is the part of the story the county still argues about at the feed store. The men holding lanterns spaced down a line of fresh auger holes, the horses walking with their heads low, the church coming through the dark with the sleet frozen on its clapboards like scales. And Arvo out front with the auger over his shoulder, walking backward half the time, watching his load, in the exact place and posture his uncle had walked in front of the bell in 1928. Slower than slow, past the eye, the water of it breathing black off to the north, with steam standing on it in the returned cold. Inside the church, Sima's lantern burned on the pew. Nobody spoke above a murmur for an hour and a half, and the lake held its own council. And by 2 in the morning, the flags of the old lane stood ahead of them again, and the eye lay behind. Arvo cribbed the shoes, walked the line once more, and slept an hour sitting up against Vapu's warm side. He was 38 years old, and in the lantern light, Taisto said afterward he looked exactly like his uncle, and meant it as the finest thing he had ever said about either man. They came to the east shore at 4 in the afternoon on the 5th of February, and the last half-mile was the thing nobody planned. It began with the school letting out, Lily leading her whole class down onto the ice to walk behind the church. And then their mothers came after them, and then everybody came. The West Shore crowd driving around the lake to join the East, until 300 people were walking out on Sarvi Lake behind 8 black horses and a white church. Hats off, nobody having decided anything, the way a county decides things. Old Mrs. Wirtanen said it out loud, laughing and wiping her eyes with the back of her wrist. There goes the funeral team. And for once the name meant what it should have meant all along. A slow walk behind something precious, carried carefully, all the way home. The shoes ground up onto the shore fill at 7 minutes past 4. Dahlberg clicked his stopwatch and studied it a moment. 33 hours of pulling, he said. I want you to know why I timed it, Niskanen. I stood on that shore Monday morning, believing I would be writing down how long a church takes to sink. He closed the watch and put it away. Instead, I'm going to file that ice log of yours at the courthouse as the county standard. And I would take it as a professional courtesy if you would let me have your uncle's book copied. All of it. The county has been calling that man a fool for 19 years, and the county is going to stop. The story of the winter went around 3 counties by spring, and the work came back to the Niskanen outfit the way the families had once left Pojala, one by one, and then all at once. But the visit that mattered came in March, when Gordy Lundin drove into Arvo's yard, sat in the truck a full minute, then got out and stood the way men stand when the words have been rehearsed and are not going to come out rehearsed. I've got 2 boys and 4 trucks, he said, and the boys can back a low boy blindfolded, and neither one of them can tell you why a load shifts before it shifts. You knew that church wasn't moving before the chains came tight, felt it through a mitten. He looked off at the barn, at the black teams inside it. What do you charge, Niskanen, to teach the slow way? Arvo considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Nothing, he said. It's my uncle's lake. I just read his book. Then, because the man had walked out on night ice with his own auger when it counted, send them Monday. Tell them to bring mittens they can feel through. Lundin Cartage and the Niskanen outfit split the county's moving work after that. Trucks on the roads, horses where the roads ended. And neither sign ever mentioned the other, and neither had to, which leaves the bell. Arvo announced it in church on the first Sunday in the new building, standing up and back in his good coat, 3 sentences, no more. His uncle's book held 1 page he had never shown anyone, and on the map that page faced, at the middle eye, in the oldest ink there was a small cross and 2 words and a number, Bell, 64 feet. Ani had gone back, some winter, no one had watched him, and sounded the spot through the ice, and written down where his hurry lay. Come February, Arvo said, they were going to ask the lake for it back, and this time they would ask right. They cut the hole the second week of February 1948, Taisto directing the ice saws like a man dealt one last hand of the only game he had ever been good at. A hard hat diver came up from Duluth with his pump and tender and went down 64 feet through green light into the silt of Sarvey Lake and found the bell lying on its side where the small cross said 19 years of lake on it in a soft gray coat. He shackled the chain to the crown. On the ice above, the tripod stood over the hole, and the fall of the tackle led away to 8 black Belgians, and half the county stood in the cold again, quiet again, breath rising, watching the chain. Arvo made the sound that was half Finnish and half nothing. Sampo and Vapu leaned first. The bell of St. Henrik's came up out of Sarvey Lake into the winter sunlight streaming gray water, and the crowd did not cheer this time either. Taisto took off his cap, looked into the hole a moment and said it quietly, to the water. It keeps things. Till you ask it proper. They rang the bell for the first time on Easter morning, 1948, 20 Easters late, from a tower that had waited empty its whole life. And they say in Cordis County that dogs stood up in farmyards 11 miles off. And the man from the state road office, coming through on the same survey that spring with his maps in the back seat, heard it come across the water and pulled his Plymouth over on the lake road, and sat there a while with the window down, not knowing any of the story yet, only knowing that a bell somewhere was being rung by someone who meant it. I have carried this story around for a long time, and what stays with me is not the crossing. It is 15 winters of a man drilling holes in a lake that had humiliated him, writing numbers no one wanted in a book no one would read, with no reason left to do it except that somebody someday might need the truth about that ice. We spend so much worrying whether our work will be honored in our lifetime. Ani Niskanen teaches the other measure, whether it will hold weight after we are gone. The slow way is not slowness, it is love, keeping records. This story is true to life fiction, told in honor of the movers, ice harvesters, and lake country congregations of the upper Midwest. All characters, names, places, and businesses are creative inventions, and any resemblance to real persons or events is coincidental.